destroyers of fake news, Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
Is that who I think it is?
Yep, sure is. Did you hear he ditched the man cave and brought back the study?
That's so sexy. I love it when a man is educated and informed.
He is so dreamy, always reading books and investigating history.
Where do you think he works out?
The library.
He is so controversial, always talking about 9/11 being an inside job, the police state, constitutional rights, ancient history, government cover-ups, and how he thinks sports don't matter in real life.
Oh, I love a freethinker who searches for truth. I love it when he feeds my brain. What's his name? Kristan T. Harris.
You're listening to the destroyers of fake news, Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future. Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live. You're listening to Rundown Live on KGRA Radio. Feed your brain and grow healthy ideas. Weekdays 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on KGRA Radio and anywhere podcasts are found. Your guide through the chaos and misinformation. You're watching the Rundown Live on band.video and the rundownlive.com.
Wasting my 550 bringing us in with Young in My Head, a cover of Starflyer 59's version of Young in My Head. I'm your host, Kriston T. Harris, bringing you your forecast in the future. Riding shotgun with me, as always, is Don By Jr. The Rundown Live is brought to you by none other than KGRA. KGRA Radio, KGRADB.com is where you can find that information, as well as therundownlive.com. Band.video. Our videos are cataloged over there and anywhere where podcasts are found. That means if you grab your cell phone and you look in Spotify for The Rundown Live, you'll find it there. By the way, this show is 100% listener funded, brought to you guys by you. You guys make the show happen. So we appreciate you guys supporting us. You can donate on therundownlive.com. You can pick up one of our cute, sexy t-shirts, the UFO boombox. We only got them in large, XL, 2XL, 3XL, 4, 5, and 6XL, but we're running low on all of them. We're going to have to get a new shirt done. But that being said, we're back today with another broadcast. If you were listening yesterday, you heard Gennady Stolyarov from the Transhumanist Party giving his opinion on economic singularity, amongst many other things. We have a guest today, Daniel Twedt will be joining us. We're going to talk about permaculture. We're probably going to talk about artificial food, 3D printing, gardening, if you like to garden. You know, what are some things that you want to put in your garden? I want you guys to think about that. What would you put in your garden if you had one? And all that and a whole bunch more in today's broadcast. What an interesting weekend. It's been crazy. I've been busy, Don. How about you? What have you been up to?
Well, it was typically a normal weekend for me. Last night at around 11 o'clock at night, I got that spring cleaning bug finally hit me. and so I was like, okay, it's 11 o'clock, time to chill out, wind down. Like, no, you got to deep clean everything. So I was up till like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning doing that.
So I'm a dude. I don't know what deep clean means, according to my girlfriend and probably many other women out there. I don't know what deep cleaning is, because what I decide is okay is maybe not as clean as, and you would think so. I'd be good at deep cleaning since I worked as a bartender, and I worked for an owner that wanted the place super clean, that smelling like a swimming pool essentially, and they're deep cleaning, and then for me that's like doing laundry. That's deep cleaning for me. Vacuuming,
Right.
Getting down into the corners with a magnifying glass really isn't my thing. But you never know. I don't mind cleaning. I was janitor for a while at a church. It was one of my first gigs, was mowing the lawn, being a janitor at a church where my cousin was the pastor. Very interesting story, but we can get into that some other time. But this weekend was pretty interesting for me. I didn't do any of that fun stuff like deep cleaning, Don. But what is your definition of deep cleaning?
Well, I was just, typically, just cleaning, stuff, dusting, getting, just making everything look all right, throwing out old shit that I don't need anymore, making space, just, getting rid of clutter, all that sort of stuff, just, freshening things up, out with the old, in with the new, springtime type stuff.
Do you feel better after you clean? Like, I'm one of those people, like when I do my laundry, I do the dishes, I clean the kitchen, I get all that stuff done. I actually feel accomplished and I feel good. Isn't it weird when you clean? It's like you physically feel better.
Right.
And I don't know if it's a psychology that the clutter creates mental stress, but I'm sure there's studies on that. But yeah, my weekend was interesting. On Friday, Lake Geneva has an event every year called GaryCon. And I went on down to GaryCon. And no, it's not a con with a bunch of Garys, convention with a bunch of Garys. Everyone with the name Gary, come on down to GaryCon. Oh, hell no, it wasn't that. In fact, it's a Dungeons and Dragons convention. And for those that don't know, the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons by TSR was created in Lake Geneva, and Gary Gygax is the founder, and TSR used to hold something here in Milwaukee called Gen Con for many years, but when Gen Con got bought by Wizards of the Coast, their TSR got bought by the Wizards of the Coast. They moved Gen Con, and so Milwaukee has not recovered, and Lake Geneva started hosting something called GaryCon right after that happened. GaryCon, again, like a bunch of Gary Gygax's festival in honor of Gary Gygax, and it's just Dungeons and Dragons all weekend, 24 hours. But while I was there, I bumped into a couple interesting people, bro. I bumped into Vince Vaughn, the actor, Vince Vaughn. and we talked Ron Paul. He's like, yeah, oh man, I love Ron Paul. We had a very brief conversation. We talked a little bit, and Vince Vaughn was a pretty cool dude. He was there playing Dungeons and Dragons. He looked like he fit right in with everybody else. I will say there's like a stigma that comes with D&D people. Like, the place will smell like BO. Their laundry looks unwashed and a little, disheveled. And I think there's like some truth to that, because when I went there, I was like, that's not cologne I'm smelling. But I will say everybody there seemed to be having a great time. It was a fun. There's surprisingly a good mix of individuals of all ages and all ethnicities and all genders. And people are just having a good time hanging out. And Vince Vaughn was there, and the Big Show was there. I guess he's a wrestler.
Yeah,
the tall, bald dude.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Paul White, hell yeah.
And then the guitarist, I think, for Rage Against the Machine was there.
Huh. That's neat.
Those three guys are kind of all hanging out, and from my understanding is they played the late night of D&D. They played at like midnight, and I think that Vince Vaughn just got up to play D&D, and he's like, "Wow, the hell are there still so many people up?" And in Wisconsin, everyone's getting wasted because we're the beer capital of the world, and it was just crowded and packed. And I'm not a drinker, so I wasn't drinking, but anything but ginger ale. And I gave up drinking, I think 7 months ago. And most people may not know that about me, but I decided for my health, no other reason. On occasion, I might consider having a drink, but I just, I'm getting old, and I'm like, I waste too much time just having a good time. So, I was there having a ginger ale, and I think that they were just getting ready for their D&D game. And I can tell you, Vince Vaughn looked like he was pumped to be there for playing D&D. Every second I looked at him, somebody was taking a picture with him. Like, the nerds were ecstatic that Vince Vaughn was there. And if you don't know, Vince Vaughn's been, what was he, in Old School? Is that what he's most well known for?
I'll be honest, as big of a movie buff as I am, I can't really recall a lot of Vince Vaughn movies. I enjoy him as an actor. I just, off the top of my head, can't really remember.
No, I know he does a lot of comedy movies, but Vince Vaughn, let's see, what has he done? He is in Wedding Crashers. That was a really big one that he was well known. Dodgeball, that's another big one that he was in. And Old School, of course, which is the one I mentioned as well, which was a really big movie. He was in there as well. And a few other, major movies. I'm sure the guy's nonstop busy. His IMDb is pretty packed. He's 8 years older than me. He looks exactly like he does in all his photographs and in the theaters, though. So it wasn't like he was hard to spot out and be like, oh, yep, that's Vince Vaughn. Sometimes when you see somebody that's famous and you see them in real life, they don't look like they do in the theaters because they try to go incognito. Not Vince Vaughn.
That's awesome.
But that being said, pretty interesting weekend. Saw Vince Vaughn, a bunch of other people. Hung out with CJ from CJ TV, influencer, media guy, big time during the protests in 2020 now? Geez, 2020, the George Floyd protests, Jan 6 and all that other jazz. He just covered protests everywhere, Chop Jazz and all that stuff. So we spent the weekend, I hung out with him on Friday night. We went to Gary Con, and then we saw Ghostbusters.
Ah, cool.
Which was an interesting sequel. But we're not here to talk Ghostbusters. We're not here to talk Vince Vaughn. We're here to talk news. There's some interesting stuff going on in the news before we bring our guests on today. We wanted to dive into Julian Assange, obviously, is one of the bigger stories we may cover today. There's also a bunch of interesting things going on with AI tracking you and will identify individuals who are vaccine hesitant. We have Tennessee banning chemtrails, aka geoengineering. Some people deny that these things exist. It's funny. Well, we'll talk about my conversation with AI about chemtrails, Don. It's phenomenal. I had this AI conversation. I had one of those Chat GPT is what I was using. And I asked it, are chemtrails real? And it said, no, chemtrails are a conspiracy. And then I said, oh, hey, ChatGPT, is geoengineering real? And it says, yes, geoengineering is a scientific manipulation of weather. And then I said, oh, ChatGPT, is not chemtrails geoengineering? It said, yes, chemtrails is geoengineering. So geoengineering is real, but if you call them chemtrails or not. So just want you guys to know all about that. So very interesting stuff. Geoengineering is just one of many things that people like to talk about. Tennessee, which, they They don't exist allegedly. So all that, we'll start talking a little bit about ChatGPT and all that fun stuff. But Don, let's talk a little bit about Julian Assange. What's going on there? I heard that there's possibility, I was seeing in the news, that there's a minor victory there.
Yeah, so it's a small victory for Julian. I wrote an article for the Rundown Live, just published about an hour or so ago. I'll bring it up here on the page. And basically what has happened now, today was basically the trial to determine whether or not Julian can be extradited to the United States, or if his legal team is able to appeal it. They have been able to successfully partially appeal it. It's not a complete appeal, which is why it's only really a partial victory. It's not great, but it's certainly better than the alternative, because let's be honest, those of us fighting for Julian have to recognize that we have to keep him out of the United States at all costs.
Why is that? Why is it we got to keep Julian Assange out of the United States?
Well, because of the political persecution against Julian Assange, it is a guarantee that he will not face fair treatment here. He will not get a fair trial. He will be exposed to some of the worst prison conditions on the planet. It has been consistently documented that the United States has among some of the worst prison conditions on the planet compared to other countries like China, Russia, at least as far as first world countries are concerned. Obviously not as bad as, say, El Salvador or some of the, the second world, third world countries. But as far as first world nations, the US, Russia, UK, China, the industrially, economically prosperous countries, that our prison system is atrocious. And with regard to Julian specifically, and the fact that our political ruling class is basically hell-bent on persecuting him for revealing the truths about U.S. war crimes that he did, it's a guarantee that he will not be given any kind of humane treatment. And that was even attempted to be brought up during this latest appeal to fight against the extradition, which was unfortunately one of the aspects that the British High Court ruled against, was that his legal team once again tried in vain to present new evidence in Assange's case that came out just a couple years ago, that the CIA, we know for a fact, it was a huge expose in Yahoo News and it got a bunch of mainstream coverage, shockingly enough, that the CIA, Mike Pompeo, a bunch of other CIA officials under the Trump administration plotted to kidnap and murder Julian Assange in London. And they plotted to do this multiple ways. They drafted plans to poison him. They drafted plans to kidnap him. And there'd be a big shootout in the London Metroway. And for obvious reasons.
I don't get it, Don. Like, why all this taxpayer money for one dude? What is it that he knows? I mean, it can't be because of what he did that they still are trying to kill him, because they were, you know what I'm saying?
It is. It is. It ultimately, it comes down to the fact that Julian embarrassed the U.S. empire. He exposed multiple war crimes that they've committed. WikiLeaks consistently continues to do that. I mean, we just had Daniel Hale, get released from prison recently, which I also wrote about a couple weeks back. He didn't leak to WikiLeaks. He leaked his information to The Intercept. But again, that's about U.S. war crimes. We had just recently on this broadcast, we talked about, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was the leaker who leaked the information about Vault 7, the biggest leak of CIA information that was provided to WikiLeaks, that we found out that they can hack into cars and, pretty much anything from. So WikiLeaks continues to be a valuable resource in exposing these crimes and nefarious activities. And particularly with regard to what Julian is charged with, they have very falsely charged him with violations of the Espionage Act and cyber crimes and things of that nature. And as I explain later in the article, this is all a farce. It's a fabrication. The Pentagon in 2013, they created a task force. I'm trying to find where I wrote about it here. They created a task force where they investigated what exactly happened, whether or not Julian's information did result in the endangering of national security or in the loss of lives. Here it is. It was called the Information Review Task Force. And they found that it did not actually result in the loss of life, about U.S. informants being killed, as it was allegedly regarded. And just a couple years ago, another nail in that narrative was also put in the coffin, essentially, when it was revealed that the main star witness
I remember
that the FBI, that the FBI relied on for most of these charges against Julian, an Icelandic hacker by the name of Sigurdur Thordarson, is a convicted child molester multiple times. He's a diagnosed sociopath, a convicted fraudster who embezzled over $50,000 from WikiLeaks during his very brief time being associated with them. And it came out in an Icelandic newspaper. Surprise, surprise, he lied about everything. And the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, was aware that he was still committing these crimes, committing these molestations, I believe, committing frauds or theft. He was involved in some sort of crimes as the U.S. Justice Department was using him to expedite this witch hunt against Julian. And so then it came out in the Icelandic newspaper Stunden that he lied and fabricated this testimony against Assange. So the entirety of the case against Julian is a farce. It has always been a farce. And so the U.S. is consistently now attempting to extradite him still to charge him with these farcical allegations, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. I actually have a video here from Consortium News from this morning when his wife, Stella Assange, gave some talks. She spoke to the media outside of the courthouse about today's ruling. So we'll go ahead and play that.
Thank you for being here. Today's decision is astounding. Yeah. The courts recognize that Julian is exposed to a flagrant denial of his freedom of expression rights, that he is being discriminated against on the basis of his nationality, an Australian, and that he remains exposed to the death penalty. And yet, what the courts have done have been to invite a political intervention from the United States to send a letter saying it's all okay. I find this astounding. 5 years into this case, the United States has managed to show the court that their case remains an attack on press freedom, an attack on Julian's life. What the courts haven't agreed to look at is the evidence that the United States has plotted to assassinate Julian, to kidnap him. Because if it acknowledges that, then of course he can't be sent to the United States. Julian is a political prisoner. He is a journalist, and he is being persecuted because he exposed the true cost of war in human lives. This case is a retribution. It is a signal to all of you that if you expose the interests that are driving war, they will come after you. They will put you in prison and they will try to kill you. Julian is just a few days away from the 5th anniversary of his arrest and imprisonment in Belmarsh prison. He has been in Belmarsh for 5 years without conviction, and the charge against him are to punish him for publishing the truth, for publishing evidence of the war crimes committed by the country that is trying to extradite him. Now, the UK courts have invited the United States to issue assurances. The Biden administration should not issue assurances. They should drop this shameful case that should never have been brought. Julian should never have been imprisoned for a single day. This is a shame on every democracy. Julian is a political prisoner. He is a publisher, and he is being published for expressing his political opinion, for expressing freedom of the press in its purest form. Free Julian. I ask everyone to rally behind him and call for his freedom, call for the Biden administration to drop the case and support House Resolution 934 before the U.S. Congress to drop this case. Thank you.
And that was Stella Assange sort of, going over today's ruling. And, as she had mentioned, he's a political prisoner for exposing U.S. war crimes. And then I elucidate upon that a little later on in my article. What he's mainly being charged with is the leak of documents pertaining to whistleblower Chelsea Manning releasing thousands of documents pertaining to the U.S.'s activities in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs. These documents demonstrated flagrant abuses of human rights and criminal activity on behalf of the U.S. military and coalition forces, up to and including the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians, as well as acts of torture and other abuses. So, it's incredible work that Julian has done. He's not committed a crime. He's being punished for telling the truth, and it's appalling.
I remember the first time I heard of WikiLeaks, I think it was in 2007 when they had ClimateGate, and he exposed all those corrupt UN scientists patching together global warming data on weather to make it look like the planet was warming, and it was not. And that's why they changed it to climate change. Shortly after they reevaluated the science, and they said, well, it's not global warming anymore, it is now climate change. And that was in direct, I believe, result of Julian Assange's WikiLeaks. And then I remember the Chelsea Manning release, as well as the Podesta leaks, the Clinton leaks, and all this other information. He's been leaking stuff for a while.
Yeah, he is, or he has. And it's the most atrocious part about his detention is that he's being held in HMP Belmarsh. It is essentially known as Britain's Guantanamo Bay for its harsh treatment of its detainees. It is used to house terrorists, neo-Nazi extremists, the worst of the worst that you can imagine. People who should actually be there in many cases, of course, also people who should not be there even when they're charged with those crimes in some cases, because even in regards to the Guantanamo Bay, the U.S.'s premier detention facility for accused terrorists, there's been plenty of exposés showing that many people who've been tortured in that facility as well have actually been innocent of what they've been accused of. So I'm sure it's the same with Belmarsh. But Julian's been there, as Stella mentioned, for almost 5 years now. April 11th will be the 5-year anniversary of when he was arrested. And, he's been sequestered there under 23-hour-a-day confinement. There have been multiple, human rights groups that have came to see him and attested to the fact that his health is constantly deteriorating. His mental health is constantly deteriorating. So it's a slow, grueling torture, even without being in U.S. custody, which is why it's imperative that he cannot be brought to this country.
He just wants a juicy vegetarian burger or something. I don't know. It would suck to be in that situation for so long.
Yeah. I think he mostly just wants to be at home with his wife.
Right. Wasn't he seeing Pamela Anderson for a while? I thought there was something there too for a minute.
There was an allegation that they were together, but Pamela herself has said that they were only friends, that she would come to visit him in the embassy every once in a while. She was a supporter of his work. And, so both Julian and Pamela have denied that there's anything
other than just being friends.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's quite interesting stuff. And Julian Assange, man, he's like the epitome of journalism, of what you want in a journalist, somebody that exposes government corruption, isn't afraid or can't be bullied by the government and establishment in order to, bury articles and bury news. And now he's paying the price. He's literally a political prisoner by many shapes and forms. There's a lot of concern on if he came to the United States, he would be assassinated or murdered or abused. And it's interesting to see what the outcome will be if he doesn't get extradited. I mean, what are they gonna do? If they release him, they could probably kill him anyways. So I don't know if he's safer in prison. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a weird situation that the dude's in. He'd have to literally disappear. like go missing or something.
Yeah,
But
it is kind of weird, but at the same time, if he's able to go back home to Australia, and be with his wife and kid, I think there'd probably be some protections put in place at that point. Even privately, I'm not sure what that would look like, but it would certainly be better than the conditions he's in
it would
now.
look like Gary Webb.
Perhaps, which is sad. But at that point, everybody would know exactly what would happen.
Yeah, and I think we already know. But that being said, we have a guest today. Futurist Daniel Twedt joins the broadcast today. Twedt is an activist of human rights, volunteer observation, permaculture design, and a whole bunch more. Welcome to the broadcast, Daniel. Always great to have somebody new on the show and bring in perspectives from other sides of the aisle of any sort. And I'm really excited to have you on. As Mike DeVerde, a friend, common friend of ours, recommended you, so we have you on the broadcast today. I wanted to, first of all, for our listeners out there, I got to ask, I had to look up what permaculture is, and I'm like, oh, gardening. I'm like, I love gardening. I can't remember what the first thing I planted in the garden. I think it was green onions. My grandma had a huge garden, but then my parents had a small garden, and now I think our generation doesn't have gardens at all. But I've been trying to get back into it because I'm learning about how smart it was for my grandparents to have a huge garden and how much money it saved them on groceries. Probably, I could imagine maybe, nowadays it probably equate to thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah, and you know what? During World War II, we were getting a third of our groceries from those backyard victory gardens.
They were called victory gardens.
Yeah,
man, victory gardens.
Like, be patriotic, grow your own.
Yeah, they don't teach that anymore. It's all GMO. Get your GMOs.
Yeah, right.
Bioengineered food. Get that bioengineered food. Look at this. We 3D printed food. Mosquito burger.
But in permaculture, it's not just about growing plants. It's actually about growing people. It's a whole kind of integrated human resource design system. I almost think if Bucky Fuller had known about it, he probably would have incorporated it into his anticipatory design science, for livingry and omni-advantaging and all this good stuff. He was one of my early inspirations. And yeah, actually, it turns out a lot of the indigenous inhabitants of the continent were already practicing this kind of self-integrating agriculture. You've got from your root crops all the way up to your canopy crops. They all are interdependent, and I think there's so much we could do to revive and rejuvenate the soil. I mean, we're kind of in a microplastic apocalypse right now. We've put so much microplastics into the environment and the food chain. We don't know what kind of long-term effects that's going to have, but I'm pretty sure they won't be good. So.
Well, it's right up there with prescriptions. I learned that in Milwaukee here, because we're right on Lake Michigan, that the fish or the amphibious fish are like changing sexes because people's urine that gets filtered out has so much prescription drugs in there. It's impacting the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think there's like tons of caffeine in the groundwater of Seattle too. I mean, it's just like, that's what your urine system does. It filters out, oh, well, this isn't something our body needs. Let's just like excrete that. So
now we know Starbucks secret. The water's extra caffeinated. I knew it.
But yeah, I mean, even like it's the water, there's huge amounts of radiation in the water around the Coors Brewery from all the, uranium and radioactive material processing there. So yeah, this truly is the Anthropocene age. There's going to be like evidence that some radical change happened to the ecosystem of Earth, around
look
the
at
time.
Fukushima. I remember. So something that was really scary is people in Wisconsin were doing rain samples after Fukushima, and it was like something ridiculous, like high, like hundreds of times higher than the supposed legal limit. And the EPA said the fish from Fukushima in that area was safe to eat. And then they asked the EPA if they checked them for radiation poisoning. They said no. And I'm like, oh, great. The EPA is doing its job as always. FDA, let's go ahead and approve this nuclear fish, these neon fish for people to just eat. And you don't know where you're getting it from. But, that reminds me of that time that I read, I think it was in 2009, that they're melting down or using nuclear power plant metal to create silverware out of. I don't understand, or something like recycled, and they deradiate it. I don't know if that's possible or how they deradiate something, but they said, oh, making silverware out of radioactive metal is perfectly safe as long as we radioactivate it. And
probably just diluted it with other metal down below the limit, But
Your
there's
teeth
a
are like
saying,
glowing
dilution is
green.
not the solution to pollution.
Right.
But
that's
what a lot of these government standards will drive companies to do, because we have kind of lost our way in the common treasury. We don't have this idea of that we all share our location values. Even though the marketplace is great, we kind of missed the boat on defining private property, where you got personal property, private property, but then there's things like the water and air and the land and outer space, and these need to be treated like a marketplace location value. Henry George wrote about this in the 1800s, and it was actually the most popular book, outselling even the Bible, his book, Progress and Poverty. That's something I got involved with the libertarian movement pretty early on. And I realized that, hey, this private property market system is great, but you can't extend it indefinitely, like monopolizing, things that people need to live, like the earth and the ecosystem. We have to institute location value marketplaces for these things. And I'm hoping to get that incorporated into the USTP platform, of which, I'm the vice presidential candidate with Tom Ross, I should mention, as well as the community science director. I think we need a science and evidence-driven politics more than ever, because politics is just about making decisions for groups of people, by groups of people. And, we got the American experiment, which I think is the latest and greatest innovation in that, but we kind of, have lost our way by giving all our power up to the intelligence, military intelligence state, as you guys were talking about. So, yeah, that's going to be. But I think if I could riff on that idea, Kennedy was going to put us on a peacetime economy, but the elites decided, no, you can't run a consumer economy without giant weapons, supply chains and demand chains. I think we could. I think we could do it through exploration of space, and because you don't have to blow up weapons every so often to create a successful consumer-driven economy. But hey, that's a gamble I guess the elites weren't willing to take. So that was pretty much a coup d'état in '63, I think. Because Kennedy was talking about, hey, let's détente, explore peace and space together, and yeah, the big military industrial complex wasn't hearing about
pulling
that.
out of Vietnam and amongst other things. I think exploring space would be a fantastic idea. I know that prior to the Kennedy coup d'etat, there was the whole Smedley Butler incident where they were trying it in the 1930s, right? And it was like the Bush family, right? Yeah. And then we elected the Bushes many years later, like, oh, we'll forget about history. We'll just let the family, do what they do. And, sometimes I wonder if we've just had a puppet government ever since 1963 in its full form, elected and selected by government agencies. I'm not sure. But I can tell you.
Butler said, I was a gangster for capitalism. Here's the most decorated Marine in history. And he blew the whistle on the businessman's plot where they were going to have a coup d'etat in the 30s, actually.
Yeah, Bonus Army March, right?
Yeah.
They're marching 500,000 troops onto the Capitol, and they were going to just take over and commandeer the Capitol, but Smedley Butler ended up going on public television and blowing the whistle, and they were naming the players in this group. And I don't think anything really ever happened of them. I'm not quite sure of the investigation and all that, but it would be equivalent to one of our top 5-star generals coming out and saying, yeah, they just paid me to try to overthrow the government. Or maybe January 6th might be pictured as something similar. But it's
a great
wild.
False flag to use these bonus marchers as your cover for the coup d'etat.
Right. Right. So they think that they'd be in there to do something good, but in reality, the next leader would be selected by these giant corporate interests who will just be running the country from behind the scenes, which is essentially what I think we had with the Rockefellers and Henry Kissingers and the Zbigniew Brzezinski, which are all dying recently. So it's like trying to figure out who's pulling the strings now that Kissinger's gone? And I thought for a while that heaven didn't want him and hell didn't want him, and they were just like, God was like, I don't want him. Satan's like, I don't want him. Let's leave him on the earth for a while. Let's let him sit there for a while. Neither of them wanted him, but now he's dead. And obviously there's the Rothschild, Lord Jacob Rothschild passed away, and it seems like a lot of this old oligarchy has passed on, and it's kind of interesting, and it's a whole new game trying to identify the new influencers. Are the children going to carry on the parents' torch, or are they going to be rebellious like many of them are, like a family who sells the restaurant after the parents died? I don't want part in this anymore. So obviously I feel our government is still heavily influenced by these major corporations, especially like Blackwater and Halliburton, and when we start talking about war amongst other big corporate interests. But now you got the Googles and the Amazon and social media. There's so many different influences out there.
Well, we do need a lot of concentrated energy and design power to explore space, to evolve beyond the womb planet here, which I'm kind of a big fan of the whole biocosmic theory of evolution. That and if we don't do it on this go round, this might be the last chance for evolution to become a spacefaring force, because there aren't enough minerals and essential elements left to have another species have a go at it, because we got the ticking clock with the sun is only good for a few more 100 million years, or even less perhaps, if some of these solar catastrophe people are right. And by the way, we're having a pretty good sized geomagnetic storm from our variable star, the sun, so we could well get some blotting out of electronic networks and devices from that. But that's one of the things that it got me interested in politics, is government doesn't seem to be proactive about preparing for these obvious existential risks, asteroid impacts, solar super, corona ejections, and existential questions. It's like, let's just have convenience be the status quo, and most people do not think proactively, and you can understand that the herd mentality. It's like, hey, don't make waves, just do what the rest of the herd's doing, and that's your in the old days that was the best way to survive. But there's too many evolutionary bottlenecks for us to go on with that kind of herd thinking. So I think things like joining up with emergency preparedness organizations, becoming an amateur radio. I'm a big fan of people getting into the worldwide hobby of amateur radio.
So what's amateur radio like these days? So like, could we broadcast the rundown live on amateur radio, or is ham radio very restricted to like just people like walkie-talking to each other?
It's a peer-to-peer. It's not broadcasting. It's super narrow casting.
Right.
But
okay.
With digital technologies, you can do a kind of quasi broadcasting. I mean, there's people that put out bulletins, and they can be, broadcast again, not broadcast, but transmitted over a repeater that has a large coverage. If it's a bulletin of interest to the amateur radio community, I'm planning to get one going on community science. There's a lot of interesting community science initiatives. In fact, with this eclipse coming up, there's a whole network of amateur radio people that are going to see how that influences the outermost part of the atmosphere, which is the ionosphere, because usually the ionosphere is interacting with all the radiation from the sun, and if that's blocked out, let's measure what that does to change it. So what they're actually doing is listening to time signals from this station called WWV in Boulder, Colorado. It sends out these 1 second pulses, and they've got a little setup you can run with a computer, and it's kind of a distributed science thing. But if you log what the delay is on these time signals, before, during, and after the eclipse, they're going to get a lot of good science on the ionosphere. And there's actually one community science experiment which involves just taking pictures of the sun during the eclipse, and they're going to NASA's sponsoring this experiment, where they're going to calculate the size and shape of the sun down to within kilometer accuracy, which has never been done before. So it might be nice to get some more evidence-based science about our solar system, where we live and where we're hopefully going to survive.
Well, the number one impact on our ecosystem and weather, maybe what major cause and why the planet might be getting warmer or colder or impacted by the sun. The sun is
Oh, it's
probably
definitely in the mix of
the biggest contributor.
Well, you've got things like water vapor, which is the number one greenhouse gas. I think number two is like methane. Carbon dioxide is fairly down the list, but they've known about that it has a heat trapping gas since the 1800s. There was a guy did an experiment on that, and they were kind of, hey, we better watch it with the carbon dioxide. but yeah, there's a lot of other factors. Like the core of the Earth is supposedly slowing down and its rotation, and that has possible interactions with the solar behavior. And we know the magnetic field of the Earth flips every periodic
12,000 years. Yeah, magnetic pole switch. In fact, it was interesting. I was reading a government report that was top secret for many years. It was called the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas.
Yeah.
And basically it discussed on how there's all these origin stories, and every 12,000 years there's another human origin story. And it seems like the world is destroyed randomly every 12,000 years. Well, his hypothesis was that it was a magnetic pole shift that happened every 12,000 years, causing catastrophic changes on our planet, including crust deformation, that would a lot to like Atlantis sinking and all these other things they linked it to. But he said this is why we have Vishnu, tens of thousands of years ago, Osiris tens of thousands of years ago, and then the most recent one was Adam and Eve. And you start to think about it, the Hebrew for like in the Bible, where it says in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth, created Adam and Eve, and he told them to go repopulate the planet. Well, repopulate means that there was someone there before, right? Repopulate means populate again. So, it makes me wonder if, the ancients who wrote and recorded a lot of these things already knew that there was generations out before just the recent human mindful generation that's there. I think that what we're going to see is if that is the case, only a few people would have survived, and how they recorded it and how everything was destroyed, may have been very different than the way we record things today. Like in computers, they etched everything in tablets and stone and metal, and maybe that's how things got carried over, and that's why we had such a population reduction at one point. But I know that they found like millions of skeletons in Egypt underneath the sand. So like their, population was booming at one time or another.
Yeah. And there's that like nano machinery in the Ural Mountains I saw recently, like little tiny spring that had to have been made by an advanced technology. And it was buried at, a geologic layer that was tens of thousands of years before.
There's a hammer like that too. They found in a coal mine, like deep in a coal mine. There's like a hammer, and it was like they thought it was super old, and it was like part petrified. In order for it to be petrified, like to explain that a man made that would explain that would at least fit the hypothesis that man would be a lot older than 6 or 8 or 12,000 years. Which with evolution, I don't think they really have a timeline down, but they like to point back to the 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, we were dumb apes, but we keep finding out that most likely that information's not accurate and that it goes way back further than that.
Yeah, and for some reason, the mainstream academic archaeologists, they would rather just shuffle this.
Well, they can't make money if they're wrong,
right? Forbidden archaeology, right?
Oh, right.
But that's the thing with academia; it becomes like a petrified temple of accepted knowledge, and if it's outside the temple, you're not going to get the usual perks that everyone else does. So,
and where did all the water come from? There's like dozens of civilizations underneath the Mediterranean, pyramids off the coast of Cuba, underneath the water, hundreds of feet or over 100 feet of water. And the question is, where does all the water come from? And people just don't know. And we like to pretend that we know. We like to pretend that, or at least believe to think that we know, but the truth is we really don't know. And I think maybe at one time culture was way more advanced in maybe a very different way. Imagine us trying to build the pyramids. We don't even know how they transferred all those stone. We can think and hypothesize, but I highly doubt they used logs and rolled them along having somebody putting another log in front of the platform and keep pulling them that way. I'm not quite sure how they moved them. And there's different types of stories that they use vibrations. We just don't know. But it's interesting to see how accurate the pyramids are. just to the size and how they were built. I don't think that's something we could attempt to replicate today, but yet we want to think that man was dumb 8,000 years ago. It's impressive.
Yeah, talk about hubris. It's like, oh yeah, we're the most advanced. It's like, but if we knew that our days were numbered, maybe we'd try to leave some time capsule that for the next that would survive a catastrophe. That's actually being done. I think up in the islands of Norway, the Svalbard, they have a seed vault, and they also have like a information archive where the information is encoded into just like optical form, so it's going to be readable and for millions of years potentially. But yeah, I think that's a good thing to think about the future. I mean, when I was campaigning here in Thousand Oaks for city council one time, I'm gonna run again, actually be the fourth time. I talked to one guy and about policy, and he's like, you know what, I don't care what happens after I die. I'm like, seriously? It's like, yeah, I just want all the policy that's going to help me, and then screw everyone else. But it makes you wonder how many constituents have that mindset that they don't care what happens after they're gone. They go on they can just be an a-hole all their life and then go on the menu for worms, and that's all. The human that's their life plan basically. But I like to think that the evolved people have aspirations and values that are greater than their own life, their own personal survival. I don't know what percent of people do you think fall into the category of having some greater than their own life values?
I mean, I could say it probably varies. I mean, there's that old I don't remember precisely what it is called, but it's like the shopping cart test. Basically, it's where like if you take your shopping cart back and you put it in the where it's supposed to be, rather than just being a jerk and leaving it in the middle of the parking lot. It sort of demonstrates your personal values and morals, because it doesn't do anything to benefit you to take the shopping cart back, but you do it because it helps other people, and so that's sort of a good litmus test, I think, for that, at least in some capacity.
Yeah,
that's why Aldi's has a chaining all their shopping carts together with a quarter, because they trust the goodness of mankind. I'm just giving you the counter.
Yeah, you gotta get
argument
back
there.
by bringing your shopping cart back.
Yeah, when you go to Aldi's, you literally have to put a quarter to unlock the shopping cart and take it out, because they know that people only put the cart back if they get a quarter.
That would be a good community science. Have a hidden camera, at a quarter-driven shop return. And have one at the regular shopping cart return. Yeah, there's definitely some room for like a sociological community science experiment there. And
but that being said, one of the things we've been talking about a lot is economic singularity, and the term singularity is a very broad term. I know a lot of people use the black hole reference for singularity of nothingness, or but when we talk about economic singularity, because that's a book that you guys have coming out, was Future Visions. It's now available on Amazon.com if people want to purchase it for $5, or if they want to read it for free, it's available, I believe, on Kindle for free. But what is economic singularity? Because I know there's a lot changing. You start thinking of smart cities. I was reading that Chipotle is hiring its first robot, and it's going to measure out all the meats that go into every burrito. So this way, every burrito has the same amount of ingredients.
Well, I mean, that's why the Japanese car makers started kicking Detroit's ass, is because they were all, using quality circles and robotics, and, they were measuring all the different steps that went into making something. When Kennedy said go to the moon in 10 years, NASA said, well, it's going to take about 1 million steps to accomplish this, and they all have to happen in the right order. So NASA actually had to invent a whole new project management theory called critical path analysis, because all those steps have a path going through them, of resources and time. But yeah, singularity, to my mind, it's something that's it's a state that's unrecognizable from the previous state. So it's like when it hits, it'll just be like if we got super intelligence, and it was connected to the internet, and it could manipulate tools it would just take off exponentially, and it would probably be like being in a lucid dream or something, or it would just be like, well, some people actually think that, reality itself is made of information and is kind of a fungible, the laws of physics are more habits than actual hard and fast laws. But yeah, I think it's more appropriately an evolutionary singularity, because 1.4 billion years ago, all the life on Earth was single-celled creatures, and then something happened where cells started to become multicellular organisms, and I think that's the precipice that we're on right now. It's like a paradigm shift in evolution, where we're going to go from single-celled, multi-celled to, I don't know, quantum cooperative organisms. I mean, there's some kind of state change coming, and it's probably going to be virtually unrecognizable to us. And I've even heard this said about like the ET question is like, yeah, they're out there, but it's so weird. We can't even like grok, the way they communicate or think or what their perception of reality is. And in fact, there's that, Donald Hoffman, I think his name is, he says, we're probably not seeing reality as it actually is. We're just processing sensory data. And if we could see the actual, fabric of reality, it would probably just be like a singularity, that it would be unrecognizable. And you think about like the electromagnetic spectrum, it's virtually infinite. I mean,
yeah,
we see a little narrow band of it, the 200 to 400 nanometers that we see visible light. But, that vibratory state of energy, it goes on up to infinity. I mean, there's no theoretical limit to how high a frequency can vibrate, right? So think of that's like a perceptual singularity that we need to explore. But, I think that as intelligence increases, so does compassion and curiosity. And I think Tom Ross made this point too, that he thinks that AI or AGI, I think you call it artisanal intelligence, it will not be malevolent. And, a lot of scholars that talk about what are the ET different species like, that 99.999% of them are basically good, and that the malevolent ones are a very, very tiny minority. But, you could do a lot of damage with that tiny minority of malevolence, I suppose. But yeah, I would just say we need to anticipate the singularity by becoming as self-sufficient and resilient and cooperative and evidence-driven and in our own lives as we can. Like I was saying, get into amateur radio, get into resilience and preparedness. Look at the Mormons. They have no abject poverty among the whole, society of Mormons, because they all tithe 10%, and they make sure everyone's got their food, 6 or 12 months or 5 years, whatever it is, of food stashed away. So, they're going to be pretty probably the survivors if the infrastructures of society.
To reckon with. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting just talking about this, because when you talked about, the evolution of humanity, a lot of people believe in the science community that transhumanism is the next step. I know I talked to Nick Pope, former defense coordinator, I think, for the UK. He was doing a presentation at Contact in the Desert, and I asked him, what are your thoughts on transhumanism? He's like, oh yeah, that's the future of humans. And so the next evolution, a lot of people believe, is like a synthetic biological interference by humanity, or CRISPR, some kind of gene editing that will help humans either live longer or mechanically, through adding of machine, live longer. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the science community as a transhumanist that we should be aware of as far as technology goes? Because they are definitely trying to extend people's lives, which is a fascinating, subject. The technology in general is fascinating. I got a story up right now here. We'll put it on the screen. Scientists create designer chromosomes. These are synthetic chromosomes and landmark genetic engineering feat. They're just genetically engineering chromosomes now, which, wow, impressive. We're playing God. But where does this go? Where are we going to go? What do you think are some of the telltale signs that man is merging and evolving?
Well, first of all, your body is a multicellular organism, but 90% of those cells are not human DNA cells. They are, microbes. They're different things that don't have human DNA in them. We're basically wouldn't have evolved without this cooperative relationship with non-human organisms. So you could say that that process is just happening again with, instead of carbon as the substrate, we've got the whole periodic table available, for the next phase of evolution. So, but we do need to keep compassion and wisdom in the loop all the time by having what's called an air gap, which means there's a safety switch. A human is there ready to pull the plug or turn off the switch. We shouldn't have autonomous, killer robots. We shouldn't have.
What do you got against killer robots? They're fighting in Ukraine right now, and Russia. They got robots against robots right now. I told Don, all I really want to do in my life is make robots and have them do battle bots, but in the ring.
Yeah, that's. There was a group, back in survival research labs back in the 80s. They had these underground wars in San Francisco, and with giant, metal cutting and flame throwing, machines.
Right.
That was like cool. The original battle bots. I think the founder of that was Mark Pauline. He's got like only a couple fingers on one hand because it was like blew off some of his fingers.
The robot took it off. He's got some great war story about it. But no, it's becoming a serious deal where the military is now. We saw it in the news yesterday where the military is investing and heavily researching robots on the combat field. And my concern is these things. I'll call them slaughter bots, because they could literally make a swarm of like 10,000 drones, and each one with the ability to terminate someone, either by flying into them or shooting them or zapping them or tasing. I don't know, just different. There's all these different possibilities. I can't even fathom the different ways you could kill somebody with drone robots, especially now that I'm seeing that they have these brain computer interfaces that are non-invasive. They're like a helmet, and you can control the drone with your thoughts and some kind of like super villain status out of X-Men. Like, it's wild. And they're saying you can control multiple drones, hundreds of drones with one person. So imagine if, in the future, I envision that people will control these drones just using their thoughts instead of using some, let's say, remote controller like we're doing now. But I think it's interesting to see where it's going, and it's not too far away in the future. So these robots got to be, I guess, more accurate. But what happens once the robots defeat the other robots? Then it goes after the people, and I don't know. It sounds wild to me. It sounds like something straight out of, a science fiction movie, almost like The Matrix.
Yeah, I remember that classic Trek episode where the people just walked into these. Oh, that was a hit. Okay, Sector 5, you got to walk into the disintegration chambers, and then Kirk is like, no, you're gonna have some real war. I just destroyed your disintegrator thing, but yeah, I mean, the defense industry has always been the primary driver of technological innovation, and this is a case of of knowledge getting out ahead of wisdom. Is like maybe that's why all the previous civilizations, Atlantis, if they destroyed themselves, it probably was a case of their knowledge exceeding their wisdom. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, because I'm kind of surprised that there's so much mass destructive capability that the average psychopath could get their hands on. We could have had like a designer plague, made in someone's basement years and years ago. I don't know if there's guardian angels looking out for us or what.
Well, I mean, it only happens in Bill Gates' basement there in Wuhan. Yeah. So. Oh, and he has the cure too, magically. So
yeah, now everyone's living in their mom's basement. So, oh my God, it's really dangerous.
Yeah, nagging for me is about as healthy for me as a pack of Lucky Strikes. That's what I say about living with my mom. So,
but the answer I think is transparency and reciprocal accountability. David Brin, the science fiction writer, talks a lot about these are the two design parameters to keep in our toolkit to keep bad actors from breaking loose and destroying the whole show. So that's something that people need to become more civically engaged. I mean, politics is just about groups of people deciding what the best way forward is for the group. But nowadays people think, oh, politics, that's some kind of group of terrible people. But no, we got to revive people's interest in being part of group decision making. And I happen to think that things like amateur radio and community science can kind of sneak civic engagement back into the public discourse. But it takes education, an educated populace, and my God, you look at a fourth grade class math book from 100 years ago, it was practically calculus. So I mean, our education standards have really degraded. So
I mean,
I don't know exactly. I don't have a silver bullet answer, but there's a bunch
I think with our education, there's a book that came out years ago called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And essentially it was a paper trail, mapping out the chronological destruction of it through corporatization and essentially creating lifelong consumership. It's
that was probably the Rockefeller Education Commission said, we have enough philosophers, we just need well-behaved factory workers. That's all we got to educate for.
Right. I mean, that's where it all ended up. And people are doing their education, going to college, spending six figures, and then not using that education at all. They're working in Best Buy for $9 or $12 an hour when they have this degree and they should be pursuing a greater career. But a lot of people don't even use their degree. I wonder how many people actually use their degree. That could probably be determined just from existing data sets. That's an interesting community science question right there. But I think with these digital utility tokens, which are different than just cryptocurrencies, you can have digital tokens that actually do real world stuff. Like there's one called Solar Coin that you earn a solar coin by generating a megawatt hour of renewable solar electricity. And, instead of just solving these, complex math questions to make a Bitcoin. But, Bitcoin is good because it hasn't been hacked and it eliminates the middleman for peer-to-peer payments. So, but, there's all kinds of other utility token things, and they have not been exploited to their full utility. So I think that's a hopeful sign, is more people getting involved with utility tokens that do a lot of cooperative stuff, that have location intelligence built in, that maybe take account for the Robin Dunbar's number. It says there's only about 150 or 250 people that you can realistically trust during your life. So maybe we need a utility token for that, and add some locations. Isn't that what the social credit score is about? By changing every interaction into a transaction, because that's kind of treading on dangerous waters. But I mean, at least then
so bad, yeah. But we got to have accountability and transparency to keep it from going bad.
Because what happens if, for example, the media reports something false about an individual and their social credit score is just hammered by all these negative reviews, and it turns out that none of that was true at all, which happens more often than you think with the mainstream media. And then how does somebody actually recover? Because their social credit score is permanently damaged. No matter where they go, they're going to get negative downgraded. We'll take, for example, Kyle Rittenhouse. For example, that wherever that kid goes, there's somebody harassing him about what's going on. Well, even though he's been exonerated from his charges, here you have an individual who is going to get constantly rated down in his social credit score because of him being a political figure or being put in a political position. So you would think that they'd put in guardrails to protect certain individuals, and then there we go. We're back to having a protected class, because I'm not giving any media personnel personality a high social credit score rating if you're going to change every transaction to a interaction, probably based on.
Didn't Kyle, didn't he get like a huge GoFundMe, paycheck for his?
He may have. I think so. Listen, I had no horse in the race one way or another. I was a witness in the trial. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I had the most extensive coverage of Kyle. So you're talking to somebody that was personally involved in the trial and was subpoenaed to be in the trial. So, like, I can tell you that there was a lot of raising of money, and I don't endorse Kyle using his clout politically, other than maybe for Second Amendment rights, because that saved his life allegedly. And that I get, but like going and running campaigns for the GOP and going to rallies and speaking at them, that's all on him. But I get what you're saying. What I'm trying to say is, like, I don't support Kyle one way or another. I just wanted the court system to do the right thing, and allegedly that's what we got. So I think that there's a consensus, not a growing consensus, a consensus out there that would rate him very poorly in social credit if they met him and we changed every interaction into a transaction. And the question is like, how do you correct it? How do you fix that? That's a pretty big issue, except for if you're going to just use it for government things to control the population, which I think is pretty much what China does. You can't fly if your social credit score sucks. You can't move this area if your social credit score sucks. You probably can only eat at McDonald's if your social credit score sucks, So,
well, that's why, we need to have government of the people, by the people, for the people. The American experiment is an experiment in self-governance, and it doesn't allow these kinds of monopolistic, tyrannical manipulations of people's behavior. But, the number one I call them humane rights, because we need an upgrade from human rights. But it's the right to live. And if someone takes away your right to live, all your other rights are obviously gone. So, self-defense is obviously pretty huge in maintaining all your other rights. They say that's why the Second Amendment was number 2, because it protects the first one.
Of course, it's sort of, when it comes to having that sort of population to create that government, of the people, by the people, for the people. I can't. It was either Samuel Adams or Thomas Paine or one of those founding fathers that said, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, but it's basically that this thing we're doing only works if the public is educated and moral. It's just, if the public's checked out, if they're not involved, if they get demoralized, like, this whole thing is going to fall apart. Like, they need to be actively involved. And since the public has become less and less actively involved, we absolutely see what we have, essentially. So it's one of those things where I don't entirely agree with the nihilistic people. It's like, oh, well, you get what you deserve because you've allowed this to happen. Because I understand there's nuance to it. There's been a lot of propaganda, psychological operations, and demoralization, deliberately sort of getting the American people more focused on the rat race and the corporatism and just stuck in the whole day-to-day shit show, rather than, focusing on, hey, are our elected officials allowed to be doing that? That doesn't seem, that doesn't seem like that's up there. If people were less concerned with, I gotta, work almost 70 hours a week just to pay rent and feed my kids. If they were less concerned with that because things are more, equitably distributed, probably we would have large swaths of the population saying, hey, aren't all these politicians associated with Epstein? Shouldn't these folks be in prison for all the shit that they've done? Well,
the other guy that's kind of an honorary founding father, de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, he said, as soon as the public figures out they can vote themselves money out of the government trough, then it will fall apart. And that has come to pass like crazy.
Universal basic income, welfare, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, geez, the interest on the debt is it's like $1 trillion just to service the interest, and that's not sustainable. You can't have these debt to GDP ratios.
Where do you see us going with the debt? Like, obviously, at some point, it's just going to be so crazy and high. What's the solution?
Well, I think the opening up the resources of the solar system is the way that we pay down the debt, because I mean, there's just like one asteroid that's got like a quadrillion, dollars worth of platinum and gold and elements, and just the amount of energy and resources off the planet, that's what's going to, monetize.
So you're suggesting mining cultures in our solar system?
I don't see any other easy pathway to that kind of $1 trillion wealth to offset, the debt that we're passing on to future generations. I mean, right now, the only thing that what do they, monetize is the debt, is the military. It's like, yeah, we can extort enough payment out of enough future generations where this will eventually be paid off, because we've got the number one, monopoly on military force to do that with. And maybe that's what keeps the dollar, the world's standard currency, because no one else, but there are good things like the Navy guaranteeing freedom of the seas, I think is a good side effect of a possibly, potentially tyrannical government, because no other Navy in the world has the ability to guarantee this kind of, freedom of access around the world's oceans. So I do give, some parts of the American experiment a lot of credit for things like that. But we can't pass on, bad ethical things. I like the idea that if you take care of the means, the ends will take care of themselves. The old idea of Machiavelli is the end justifies the means. But I think if you have ethical means, you'll get ethical ends. And that's the idea, I think, that the founders of the American experiment were also trying to bring about. And,
Right.
Keep in mind that only, 2/3 of the world is a relatively open society with basic human rights. The other 1/3 of the world is living effectively like open air prison camp. So, we need to be doing more to spring those hostages that are not blessed with the liberties that we've so far kind of attained.
Right. And when we talk about the whole concept of space mining and things of that nature, I mean, to me it seems very common sense, because like we have right now on this planet, as you mentioned earlier, we have this collection of finite resources. We only have a certain limited amount. And in addition to that, the way a lot of these economic systems have been set up, the corporatist systems, because there's like libertarians like to debate back and forth capitalism, and I always sort of bring up that Murray Rothbard made that differentiation in his paper, and I think it was 1971-72, the importance of distinguishing between free market capitalism and state capitalism. And what the United States was doing then, and is even more so doing now, is state capitalism, which is essentially in line with corporatism. And once you research corporatism, Benito Mussolini himself equated corporatism with fascism. So take that for what you will. But we see these economic systems in place, and we see what they've done, especially relative to the third world, the way that resources have been pillaged from places like Africa and Central America. Well, if we were to flip that on its head, say, okay, well, instead of earthbound resources, let's go to space. It's not like colonialism. It's not like, we're cutting down trees and swaths of the Amazon. Nobody needs asteroids. Asteroids don't necessarily serve a purpose, but they got a bunch of platinum and gold. We can get that stuff, and we can help rejuvenate our economy without destroying other people's nations and pillaging their resources, so that uplifts them. It's a win-win for everybody, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we could, the indigenous people had the first dibs on their land before the European expansion and colonizers came. So I'd like to see the Earth be a natural park stewarded by the planet's indigenous people, and the bold, the meek will inherit the Earth because the bold will be leaving it, kind of thing. But we don't know of any other functioning ecosystems out there, so we can't risk damaging the ecosystem of the Earth any further. We might have already damaged it beyond its ability to be a closed cycle ecosystem, but maybe that's why we're going to need a new substrate for life and consciousness, is because we've screwed up the old biological substrate. So we've got this plan B, which I'm not a advocate of doing it on purpose, but hey, you got to keep your options open. I'm kind of a possibilian, that way.
So with regard to that, permaculture, that's one of the big things that you're involved with, that you concern yourself with. Explain to our listeners, because I know a little bit about it, just a little bit. I don't know enough to even really give a basic explanation of it. But I know that Derek Rose he runs the Conscious Resistance Network. You may know of Derek, perhaps. And he's involved with the Freedom Cells Network and the People's Reset, sort of counter to the Great Reset agenda, and all these sort of other things. And he and some of his colleagues, where I first heard of permaculture, and I was like, that sounds like a really neat idea. This is ecosystem of creating regenerative food growth and gardening, and helps the environment and things of that nature. So explain for our listeners a little bit of precisely what permaculture is and why it's imperative to start implementing it more in creating the solutions that we need to create.
Well, actually, I'm a big fan of the author of the book Guyome, Kev Polk, who used to be a very big fan of permaculture. But one of the design principles of the 12 permaculture design principles is prefer small and slow solutions. And if we're going to do this space evolutionary transition, the small and slow solutions, I'm sorry, they're not going to cut it.
Drastic and crazy, right?
What's that?
They're going to be drastic changes. They're going to be, quite a bit more expansive and quick changes that they're going to have to attune to. So when you think about colonizing an asteroid, and you're going to probably have to send robots to do it. It's the only way I can think of. Robot diggers.
Kev Polk has a system called Edenicity. That means building Eden-like. Like in the Bible, Eden was a paradise, right? I mean, it was like a permaculture. You needed food. It was all growing and integrated in the garden around you. It was all, if you believe the legends of Genesis, it was like, hey, it was Eden, right? It's paradise. So we Kev Polk says, if we don't get this Edenicity right on Earth, we're probably not going to be able to export a workable ecosystem off the planet. So, I think if our cities become, you've heard that 15-minute city idea, which is, not a terrible, it's been pilloried. Oh, this is the Great Reset and we're going to eat bugs and be turned into robots and stuff. But yeah, there's always that risk. But the way we built our infrastructure, it was just kind of ad hoc. Oh, this is convenient. Let's do it this way. Oh, there's more stuff over there. Let's go cut that down. Oh, these beavers are valuable. Let's kill them off. We didn't really think through our interaction with nature. And essentially that's what, permaculture at its heart is being a good stakeholder with nature and the ecosystem, because, the ecosystem, I'm sorry, we wouldn't be here very long without a functioning ecosystem. And like I said, we may have already broken, the viable ecosystem to be sustainable and regenerative. But, look at the soil. That is the microbes that live in the soil have undergone millions and millions and hundreds of millions of years of iterations of testing, funguses and microbes that are creating a soil ecosystem. And there's so much AI in the soil that we would be hard pressed to replicate that. So just like starting with turning soil from just dead dirt back into a viable living thing, there's the plants actually use these mycelial networks and these chemical communication networks. And, one plant over here needs something and the other plant will sense that and start making it. There's so much amazing neglected intelligence going on beneath our feet. In fact, one of Kev Polk's Edenicity episodes is a couple of them are just about the miracle of the soil. I like what I call global warming. We should be just supporting raising earthworms, and there's a cool soil experiment that started in Canada. I think it was the Conservation Council, but it's called Soil Your Undies. And it's kind of funny. You get a pair of cotton underwear and you bury it for like 60 days and dig it up after 60 days. And if your soil is healthy and living, just pretty much the elastic band will be left. The other stuff will be all eaten away by the soil. If it's dead soil, it's pretty much going to be, intact.
Right. When it comes to the rejuvenation of the soil, one thing that fascinates me is something I heard about. It's probably back in 2017 at this point now. Terra preta, Amazonian.
Yeah, the Amazon.
Yeah.
I was just going to talk
Biochar.
about this black soil, bro. You stole my thunder, bro.
I'm a huge biochar fan. Yeah, and you can make that. We could be making that with concentrated solar energy. Just take cellulose containing material, put it in front of a parabolic mirror with the air reduced, and what it does, it doesn't burn. It turns right into basically kind of a charcoal material, but it's a porous material, and it's like a life raft for all these little soil microbes that I was talking about. So I mean, gourmet gardening stores sell it for like $10 a gallon, I think, if you want to.
Well, what's crazy is that the Amazonians, they knew this back then.
Yeah.
They cultivated like a crazy large forest, and we have problems doing that now. This is nutrient dense soil, the best soil you can get, and it's very hard to deplete the nutrients from the soil. And I think that might be a wonderful solution, planting trees. Also, it makes me wonder if they knew something about our environment that encouraged them to plant all these trees, maybe to save the planet per se and create more oxygen.
Yeah, well, they were, I think, actually making the terra preta by smothering, the dead tree branches and wood in pits, which you can do it that way. It's pyrolysis. It's called. It's when you pyrolyze something in a oxygen reduced environment. It doesn't get all consumed, and like I said, it turns into this porous biochar material. But yeah, the Amazon is actually, the topsoil in the Amazon is very thin layer because there's so much churn and turnover going on, in the Amazon. And like in Ukraine, they've got black soil that goes down like 8 feet deep, the breadbasket of Asia, but that's not how it is in the Amazon. But like you said, the indigenous people had this sort of innate permaculture sense to create this terra preta, this biochar.
But how did they know that it was good for the soil, that was the best stuff? And like somebody had to be like, I almost believe somebody had to be taught that they just knew it throughout of like luck and chance. Just the odds that man came up with something so efficient that we to this day didn't know about it. Oh, we didn't know about it till recently, I should say. And that they had this knowledge back then, and they were creating this ancient, black dirt per se.
Well, it could have been psychedelic plants, I mean, how did they get the idea to make ayahuasca? You listen to Terrence McKenna, there's these two plants and no one would ever think of combining them. One's got DMT and the other's got the inhibitor that keeps your body from destroying the DMT. And you make a brew out of it and you go on this, 8-hour astral travel journey where you have access to all kinds of, oracular knowledge, let's say, stuff that we can't explain how you're knowing it. But I think there's a story about peyote's discovery. There was a woman lost in the desert, and a voice told her to like eat this little button on this funny looking cactus, and it rejuvenated her, and she found her way back to her tribe.
Interestingly enough, McKenna actually has a book, I believe it's called The Food of the Gods, where he talks about the role that the ancient people's consuming psychedelics played in our development. In the development of like man's spiritual nature and getting in contact with higher realms of consciousness and things like that.
The stoned ape theory. Yeah, that's our brain took this. Our brain made this huge expansion, about 100,000 years ago, and it would correspond to people finding psilocybin containing mushrooms, which actually in low doses, they give you better visual acuity, they give you better hunting aim. So yeah, and it would have spurred like language. So I mean, there's debate whether or not that's approvable, evolutionary.
But the fascinating thing about it, to me at least, because I study a bunch of history, and I'm sure you do as well. I know Kristan certainly does. And what I found really interesting is even when you look at ancient cultures, we know now there are studies that have shown it's most likely that Moses or the idea of Moses was probably tripping on mushrooms because they know that people in the Middle East people had they know that people in the Middle East during that time would consume psychedelics. We know that Native Americans from both here and North America, or from here in North America and Central America, did so as well. Even cultures, up in Northern Europe. I'm a Norse pagan. I'm a follower of the Norse gods, and it's now generally understood that our people, there was a certain the fly agate mushroom or whatever. It's the classical looking mushroom, the red mushroom with the little white dots on it, and they would consume this in a brew. Yeah, and they would consume this in a brew, and that's essentially how their shamans got in contact with the gods and, sort of established their whole spiritual connection. So just to find that all over the planet, and it's in Australia as well, just to find that all over the planet is fascinating.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, Don, because, the term Moses is a title, and he was the right-hand man of Pharaoh, and in history, he was an adept in the Egyptian mysteries. So that they loved the lotus flower as a form of tripping and psychedelics, amongst other things. So it would be very common knowledge for anyone of that strength of being a right hand man of the Pharaoh to know these kind of things. And he probably did take some mushrooms, the burning bush, and when he was trying to seek some kind of guidance, maybe these mushrooms were the answer. I remember the first time I accidentally did anything, I think it was DMT. I've never tripped other than that one time, and I came away with a very interesting viewpoint on life and how everything is connected, and every action has a equal and opposite reaction. Whether it's buying a soda at a store could impact somebody in someplace else in the world just because you made that choice to buy one item. It was really interesting trip.
Yeah, I mean, we are not separate from nature, and that's the cosmic consciousness kind of, mystic ancient wisdom, is that, you may feel like you're just this self and other relationship, but you're actually, in a continuous flow of greater creation. And that's something to be grateful for. And I think if you are approaching the universe with a spirit of gratefulness and curiosity, that you will have access to these oracular hidden realms of knowledge, the Akashic records. And, you don't even have to do regular psychedelics, so-called. I had a friend at one of my first jobs. He was taking a supplement called choline, which you can buy at any vitamin store. And he was working himself up from a third of a gram a day, half a gram, couple grams. And what he said was his dreams became so lucid that he couldn't tell the difference between his dream state and his waking state. So he had to stop at that point. But I mean, lucid dreaming is an amazing way you can kind of astral travel, in your spare time. If you become conscious that you're having a dream, which is a kind of a tricky thing to do. There's tools that you can get, like the dream light. It'll sense your brain waves and flash this light when you're making the right was it theta state, I think,
the theta brain waves.
Yeah, so then you can say, hey, I'm dreaming, I can do anything I want. So I mean, this is a great way to trip without having to worry about being drug tested.
Right. And it's that sort of that state of lucidity when dreaming is so fascinating, because it's something to me I used to be able to do a lot when I was younger. Now it's I guess as you get older, it just becomes a little more difficult the less and less you practice it. So it's a little harder for me now. But I actually learned a lot about driving from lucid dreaming. It helped me prepare for my license. I was working at a car shop. I was a detailer, and so we would clean and detail the cars, and then we would drive them up to the front. And I wasn't allowed to drive them up to the front because I didn't have my license yet. I was like 17, 18 years old, and so I was like, every once in a while, my boss, because he was really cool, like he would let me, spin one of the cars around the lot, just get a little bit of practice, because he was kind of irritated the fact, like, hey, the fact that you're not able to drive them up front is kind of hurting the fact of, hurting our bottom line. We need to get these things out of here. And, he's like, so I need you to kind of practice in some capacity. And so this is during a time when I could lucid dream. And so that for like a week straight, I would go to sleep and try to make myself dream about just driving around the parking lot. And a couple times I was able to enter a state of lucidity where I knew I was dreaming. I was like, okay, cool. It doesn't matter if I mess up, because it's not real. So just continue practicing. And I practiced driving in a state of lucid dreaming. And, I was a good driver before I took my test to get my license. So
that is a cool story. We ought to have a university of lucid dreams. Like, you get continuing education units for.
Well, I mean, isn't that what the closest thing I would think to lucid dreaming would be virtual reality?
Yeah,
that's crazy. If you've ever put on some VR goggles, it like brings you into, like, you're in the room that you're in, but like those goggles make and trick your mind that you're in a whole different environment, and it's trippy. It's crazy. It's actually sometimes nerve-wracking. Like, you feel like you're on a roller coaster. Your body thinks it is, but you're not. You're just sitting on your couch. It's wild.
Yeah, it's almost like something called the overview effect that there's a documentary about, which, these astronauts that leave Earth and they look back at Earth, a lot of them have this kind of neo-psychedelic experience about, wow, I mean, we're in this incredibly fragile, planet, and there's space. We have to take care of it. And there's actually people replicating the experience of going into space and seeing the Earth with virtual reality. So it's a great, that might be a great way to get more people to care more about the state of the world and evolution. And, because like Hollywood always gets wrong. It bugs me, if you think, how big is the Earth and the moon and how far apart are they? The right scale is, if the Earth was a basketball, 12 inches, the moon would be a softball 30 feet away. But you never see that proper distance and scale, because it's just hard to show. But that's the actual scale of the Earth. And the sun would be like a 100-foot sphere, I think, like a mile away or something like that. So just getting like and I think lucid dreaming and psychedelic experiences and, meditation, these all give you this kind of overview of your place in the universe. That is, maybe that's the education that we need to catch up on to have a political system that works. More people with a proper sense of scale about the nature of reality. Because, I mean, there's the Planck length, which is, I think, 30 powers of 10 down. And then there's the edge of the universe, which is about 30 powers of 10 upward. So isn't it interesting that we're right in the middle of those two measurable extremes, of science?
Well, and it's interesting that a lot of people in Silicon Valley also are all doing psychedelics, and they find it as a great inspiration to learn and be creative and come up with new things. And I think that's why you see some of these cool patterns that a lot of these indigenous cultures have come up with, as well as their creativity just in general. Obviously, the Aztec pyramids are quite creative, and they align with equinoxes, and you look into all these different historical references that they had. That knowledge is wild and incredible. But Dan, a question for you. With the economic singularity, what are some of the concerns that you may have moving forward with this technology and everything going the way of automation and designer babies, artificial womb facilities? You mentioned smart cities, 15-minute cities. I get a lot of these ideas and concept. They come off as genuine, but a lot of times you got to look at it and go, boy, are we going to be replaced? And is that a good thing? What are we going to do? How are we going to make money? Because that corporatists, they just want more money and power. And if there's no money to go around, that doesn't sound too good to us, because then they're going to get bored and be like, there's too many people on this planet. How can we get rid of them? Because that seems to be the case now already,
Yeah, this is the kind of question that we need to be asking and answering very comprehensively and very cooperatively. But you think, well, again, going back to the evolution of life, going from single cell to multi-cell 1.4 billion years ago, what happened? I mean, did multicellular life eliminate single-celled life? No. Actually, we incorporated the single-celled life. Like I said, 90% of your cells in a human body have no human DNA in them. They are single-celled, microbes and viruses and different things that are all, acting synergetically to keep this lump of protoplasm, so they're able to walk around and survive for a while. But, you won't lose your job to artificial intelligence right away. You'll probably be downsized because someone is using it better than you are, and so you're going to have to compete with someone who's using it and the people who, so there'll kind of be this digital divide that's getting steeper and steeper. People that are taking advantage of technology and the people that aren't. And we probably, will need something like a UBI. And fortunately, there's a great UBI called solar dividends, where if we price a kilowatt hour at $1, which right now it's usually like 10 cents, but if communities should build these solar farms, price the power of the electricity kind of artificially high, and then create these trust funds for the energy that's being generated that people collect when they turn 18. And this guy, Professor Robert Staten, has worked this out. He's a UC Santa Cruz professor. Solardividends.org, I believe, is his site. But yeah, in 3 generations, we could have a UBI for everyone on Earth, and we could be beyond burning fossil fuels, which, hydrocarbons are way too valuable to be burning. I mean, you can do 3D printing. You can create, it's a great feedstock for making stuff. I mean, burning hydrocarbons, that's like so Stone Age, So that's one way to ease the transition. Technologies are always disruptive, but if we have a free market, and I hope it's a market that values location values and doesn't monopolize things you need for life. Like I said, like air and land and water, those things should be in a commonwealth kind of treasury. But, human creativity is the biggest resource. Oh yeah, there you go. Solar dividends. Yeah, he's got a great YouTube about it. And I'd like to see him combined with Solar Coin. Actually, I don't know if they've met each other. Is that that's got to be Robert Staten's site. It's changed a little bit since I saw it. But
solardividends.org, and it says solar dividends are monthly cash payments that are generated from the sale of solar electricity and delivered to individuals as a guarantee of a basic income. Any community can form a solar dividends nonprofit organization whose purpose is to build and maintain community solar arrays to generate solar dividends. The nonprofit arranges for a site, contracts a system, design, arranges financing, and builds the community solar array.
Yeah, that's something we could be doing, yesterday. And another thing is like libraries loaning out tools and maker spaces and things called time banks, where people can share an hour of their time of one service for someone that's got an hour of their time to do another service. These are alternative currency ideas that go back to Ithaca bucks. I think in the 60s, there was in Ithaca, New York, they started this community currency called Ithaca bucks. And there are literally thousands of community currencies out there. And the cool thing about time banks is that the IRS has said that's not a taxable transaction when you swap an hour of your time for an hour of someone else's time. They don't get involved in that transaction. So how cool is that? And these things usually get up to about 150 people, which again is the Dunbar number of the usual amount of people you can trust in a lifetime. And then they kind of start another one, with another 150 people. And usually there's a monthly potluck that, you have people kind of get to know each other, who's got what skill. So yeah, I would do the solar dividends, the time banks, the tool makerspace loaning libraries. And the other thing I like is, haven't mentioned yet, but the seasteading, the idea of having floating habitats at sea. I was actually part of a team. We were in the X Prize, Gigacarbon X Prize, and they had one for air, land, and ocean solutions for getting carbon sequestered. And our solution was to how much carbon could you sequester with a band of seasteads at the equator. The equator's nice because you don't have a lot of heavy duty storms and waves. And if we had this 40-kilometer wide belt all around the equator that was doing things like growing papyrus, hemp, kelp, bamboo, making biochar, relieving the refugee problem. I mean, think of all the people in the world that are displaced. They should have access to low-cost shelters at sea. And already there's millions of people living on sailboats and cruise ships. So we kind of already have this seagoing population. And, this is a water planet. And another thing we could do is put a superconducting cable around the equator that load balances the electric demand from the day side and the night side, where there's a surplus on one side and a deficit on the other side. Then the price of electricity would drop a heck of a lot. Right. And then Bucky Fuller, he said we should have a currency based on the kilowatt hour because everyone uses kilowatt hours of electricity. This would be a great, it wouldn't be debt and slavery money. This would be like a utility token kind of thing.
Have you guys seen the gold backed currencies that people have been coming out with? They're like gold plated dollar bills, and they have like a 1/1000th of an ounce. So they have like a $5 value or $20 value. I mean, that's a pretty cool idea on the non-crypto level, because that actually has value. And if the value of that bill goes up, it has more purchasing power. Go ahead,
and gold is an incredibly useful element. It's like, I think it's the second most conductive. I think silver's number one, then gold and copper, but silver oxidizes. Gold, it doesn't. That's why they use it in so many electronic applications, because it doesn't corrode or oxidize. Yeah, there you go. The gold backs. Yeah, those are cool.
And speaking of seasteading, like you mentioned, I'd never thought of that before, but you had mentioned hemp, and one thing that I've always, well, not always, obviously, but over the past several years since I really learned about the subject is I essentially consider it to be imperative to, at some point, if we actually want to fix the economy, we need to industrialize hemp and hemp production, because we can literally, hemp is like a miracle plant, basically. It can literally produce tens of thousands of products, anything made from petroleum, anything made from plastic, anything made from paper, textiles, cotton, you can literally, I learned the other, a couple years ago, the roots of it can be used to create like bio batteries or something of that nature. It can also be used to produce biodiesel, which burns cleaner and is far cheaper to produce than actual diesel and gasoline. So it can completely revolutionize the entirety of the global economy. It just won't be profitable for monopolies, which is why they ban it and outlaw it.
We could use hemp seeds as money, every hemp seed could be like a penny. I mean, it's the longest, strongest fiber, most complex molecule in the plant kingdom, grows everywhere from the Arctic Circle to the equator. I actually did a college radio show at KUCI FM in Irvine, California, called Radio Free Hemp. It was like probably the best time of my life, from like 1994 to about the year 2000. But I had Jack Harrer, Chris Conrad. I had all the big people in the hemp movement. That was such a great time. Unfortunately, the air checks were stored in a storage unit that got auctioned off when I was kind of poor. But somewhere out there might be air checks of the show. But yeah, I'd love to revive that. My air name was Dan Free Hemp.
Nice.
Well, guys, we are running out of time. Boy, that show went fast. Dan, I appreciate you for joining us. Let our listeners know, first of all, where they can find you, where they can find Future Visions, the book that is out. That you did you contribute a chapter to Future Visions as well?
I'm online to do one for the next
next one, because I know they invited me to their Omni Futurist event, which is pretty cool. I appreciate them, and I think they're inviting Don as well. I don't know if he got the email, but. Dan, let our listeners know where they can find out more about you. I appreciate you joining us. As time flies, and the information.
I could go on talking to you guys a while. You guys are so fun to talk with, man. For the Permatrail project, which is the idea of a permaculture greenway corridor around the world, which is kind of half built. I've got the domain permatrail.org. It just points to a Facebook group and a page about it right now, but I'm hoping to get up a more comprehensive website. If they want to know about the run with the United States Transhumanist Party, you've got transhumanist-party.org. And then I guess for the book, just go on Amazon and search Omni Futurist. I don't have the link I'm sure that'll bring it up. I don't think anyone else is using that term omnifuturist, but it's a great term. I kind of like it better than transhumanist almost, because it sounds like omni-advantaging, which
sounds a lot cooler.
Right. Well, definitely, because transhumanism has become such an umbrella term.
Yeah,
people affiliate with all these things that it's really not about. You know, everything from cryptocurrency, weather modification, geoengineering, whatever is futuristic. They're like, oh, that's transhumanism. It's like, no, it's life extension. It's longevity, but it's become an umbrella term one way or another. Dan Twedt is our guest. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to have you back. You guys are listening to the Rundown Live on KGRADB.com, band.video, anywhere podcasts are found, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher. Support us, donate, go to the rundownlive.com. We're 100% listener funded. If you'd like to pick up a t-shirt, you can private message Don or I on Facebook, on Twitter, or any of these other platforms. You guys have a blessed day. We'll see you guys tomorrow. You're listening to the Rundown Live.
You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Christian T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.